Welcome back. In this section, we're focusing on object-oriented programming, or at least JavaScript's flavor of OOP, object-oriented programming. So we'll cover things like constructor functions and classes, super keyword, inheritance, but we're going to start with a quick video on a quirky but important aspect of JavaScript, object prototypes. So you may have come across this at some point. We've briefly touched on it throughout the course a couple times. We're now going to take a deeper dive into what the heck a prototype is. What does it mean? What is this thing when I look at an array? What is this proto proto property? So that's what we're going to talk about first, and then we'll go more into creating constructor functions and classes and all of that stuff. All right, so according to MDN, prototypes are the mechanism by which JavaScript objects inherit features from one another. Objects can have a prototype object, which acts as a template object. So what this means is that certain objects, like we'll take an array as an example, an array has a whole bunch of different methods. If we look at something like array on MDN, on the left side, we've seen this a couple times, methods, under methods, there are so many methods that start with array.prototype.concat, entries, every, fill, keys, push, reduce, all these methods that we use all the time, like 123.push 4. That push method is not defined as a method on this array right here. If I save it to a variable, const r equals 123. If we look at that array, I don't see any methods right here. I mean, I could define my own method, array.sing equals a function, and we can console.log how about la. Okay, so there is a function, or a method technically, that I added to the array itself. The individual array, it has a method called sing. Remember, arrays are objects in JavaScript. So when we added that method to array, we see it show up here. But when I call array.push, push 5, I don't see that method listed here. I don't see any of the methods we used. They're all inside of this property called underscore proto, or just proto. Some people also call this dunder, dunder. I just say proto. It's a property that references the array prototype. So a prototype is the template object for, in this case, arrays. It contains a bunch of methods typically. So all of these methods that every array will have access to. But rather than defining them individually in every single array, a separate copy, right? I could make another array here, const array2 equals 456. We look at array2, it doesn't have its own copy of push and pop. All that it has, just as the original array that we created, they both share a property called proto, which is a reference to this blueprint object, the prototype. This prototype contains all of the methods. And through the magic of JavaScript, I can simply access array dot, and then what's another one we haven't used yet? How about includes? Does that array include 2? We get true. This includes method is not defined on every single array that we make. It is defined on this prototype object. Now the reason I'm bringing this up is that it matters. It's something we will cover and come back to as we talk about defining classes and constructor functions. So rather than having a separate method on every single array called push, there is one prototype, and each array has a reference to that prototype with this special property _proto. And we actually can see this in other types of objects in JavaScript. What if I take a look at the document.body and I save that to a variable, const, we'll just call this body. If we look at body, I'm going to have to console.dir body. We'll open it up. It has certain properties that are specific to this body. Things like the base URI, the background, but then it also has a proto down at the bottom. Its prototype is an HTML body element, and there are different methods and properties that correspond to that prototype template, this HTML body template. So that's the basic idea of a prototype, or prototypes in JavaScript. We have this one object that is the prototype for other types of objects. So there is an array prototype. if I look at array.prototype, capital A array, so not an individual instance of an array, but capital A array, here is everything on that array prototype. And I could actually define my own type of an object, my own brand new object, and set its prototype to the array prototype, and I would have access to those array methods in my whatever object, my version of the array. But we're not there yet. All we need to know at this point is that prototypes are like a template object. That's actually what they are. They are objects. They contain typically a bunch of methods, and then we can create multiple objects that share the same prototype so that they all have access to the same methods without having to have their own copy. Now, as a fun little demo here, we can actually mess with or add our own properties and methods to the array prototype or object prototype or whatever prototypes we want. There is a string.prototype as well. Strings are kind of confusing because we've talked about how strings and numbers and booleans are technically primitive types. However, in JavaScript, they all get these intermediate object wrappers. And that's where all those string methods come from, the string prototype. So I could actually add on something to the string prototype. Right now, if I just take a look, we see a bunch of string methods like concat and a property like length. What else do we have? Substring, starts with, search, replace. I could add my own method called Grumpus. Go back to good old Grumpus, set it to an arrow function, and we'll just console.log. Or how about we alert? Go away. Just like that. Okay, so it doesn't seem like much happened. We look at string.prototype. This prototype object, this template for other strings, now has a property called Grumpus. So why don't I make a new string? I'll call this const cat equals blue, I guess, one of my cats. Now, what if I try and call cat.grumpus? Hey, this page says go away. So now every time I make a string, at least until I refresh my page, I now have access to a new string method called Grumpus. I could also add on a property. I could do string.prototype. How about we do yell? And we'll do something slightly more complicated. I think I'm going to move over to my code here. Let's access string.prototype, which remember is the prototype object for every string. It is the place where string methods are stored. I can now add on something. Let's go with yell, which will be a function. And let's just console.log this inside of here for a moment. So we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I want to just show something kind of fun. If I run my code, I make some string like hello, and I call .yell. This referred to the string hello. So what I could do is console.log this dot to uppercase. So this refers to whatever string we're calling the method on, which is actually something we've seen before, where we had an object and we would refer to this.x inside of that object. This will refer to whatever's on the left-hand side of that dot, at least in this case. So let's try hello.yell again. All right, we've just called an existing method .to uppercase, which is already there. So why don't we return a template literal string where we have this .to uppercase plus a bunch of exclamation points, and then how about some other stuff like OMG, more exclamation points. That's screaming apparently. Okay, refresh my page. I make some string like I love you .yell. And this is what we get. We've made our own method that we can use on every single string. It's important to realize that this is not really a good idea. This is not a pattern that I would recommend you follow all the time. It's just a demonstration of how prototypes work. So we can add something to the array prototype, array.prototype, which is a specific object, a template that stores methods and properties for every single array. And we can override something like .pop. And we'll make that a function, but it will just always return, sorry, I want that element. I will never pop it off. Okay? So we are now replacing the existing pop that every array looks up to on its array prototype. So if I make an array like 3, 4, 5 and I call pop, it doesn't work. We get our version. So kind of fun stuff, not highly recommended, but it is going to be informative. It will be helpful to understand prototypes. It's actually a relatively simple idea. It's very intimidating, I think, when you're starting out. But the idea boils down to having a single object that contains common properties and methods that other copies, other objects of arrays or other strings look up to find their common properties. It's a place to store things. It's a template, a blueprint. There's so many ways of putting it, but the term in JavaScript is prototype. The one confusing thing that I would like to address is if I make an array here, const, nums again, I know it's so boring, nums 789. If I look at nums, what is this underscore proto versus prototype? So they both are very similar, and they both sound like prototype or proto. This here, array.prototype, is the actual object where we add the methods to or the properties. This is the template object, the prototype. This is a reference. So underscore proto is a property name on this array or on this string. I could look, I don't have a string there, but I could make a string const dog equals Timothy. And if I look at dog.underscore proto, it's a reference to the string prototype, to this object. So it's a reference versus this here is the actual prototype object that I can add on to. But inside individual strings or arrays or other objects, the property name that is used to reference that actual template, the prototype object, is _proto. It's pretty rare that you would ever need to touch this yourself or do anything with underscore proto. If anything, you will be accessing the actual prototype itself and manipulating it. So that is a brief primer on prototypes. Next, we're going to talk about some basics of constructor functions in JavaScript.